do that. I was just about to explain that, Yasmin, so no problem. Yes, this week, as is our norm over the last few weeks for obvious reasons, we're doing a two-part introduction. I will touch on Iran. I think, I don't think I've really got any choice on the matter, but Yasmin is going to cover in particular internal developments inside Iran, which I'm just not, I haven't read and don't know. Okay, so the first point to make is, of course, that we have a US pause. This was announced by Donald Trump. It should be stressed, of course, that we're not talking about a pause when it comes to attacks. So Iran is still being attacked. This is a pause on the threat, basically to take out Iran's electrical power infrastructure, which could be done, I would have thought, extremely quickly. And what the consequences would be, I just can't imagine. I mean, nowadays you need electricity to pump water, you need electricity, obviously, for hospitals, you need electricity to run railways. I just can't imagine the consequences other than saying that they would be absolutely catastrophic. Now, the question is, why has the United States decided to pause, put a pause on that threat? Now, myself, I've got two explanations here, and they're not mutually exclusive, and it could actually be both. The first one, which is my version of at least one reason, is that the United States thinks it can continue to degrade Iran's offensive, defensive capability. And what I'm talking about, of course, isn't its air force, isn't its navy, apart maybe from speedboats now. What I'm talking about is ballistic missiles and drones. Ballistic missiles, I would have thought, are a lot easier to deal with than drones. Why? Because there's going to be fewer of them. In terms of intelligence, where they're hidden, where they're based, that can be discovered through satellites. It can be discovered through agents, sympathizers on the ground. On the other hand, drones will be so numerous that while you can take out, this warehouse or this command center, we're dealing with something qualitatively different. Now, of course, ballistic missiles not only can go a long way, they go fast. And although some of them undoubtedly nowadays will be shot down, this is what tends to get through with effect. So drones, yes, of course, can get through. But in terms of their explosive power, we're dealing with a different order. Nonetheless, that's one possibility. In other words, Trump has been advised by the military that if we want to go in big time against Iran, much better to give it this pause in terms of any retaliation by Iran. So degrade their ability to retaliate. That's one possibility. The publicly stated reason is, of course, that talks are going so splendidly well that, Trump, in his generosity, has decided to take a step back. Now, of course, what we're dealing with, and we've been saying this throughout, even when they're not negotiating, of course, there will be diplomatic channels. And the ones that we know about, it doesn't mean that that's all there is, but the ones that we know about are via Pakistan. This doesn't mean that Iranian and American officials are sitting in the same room, but they're communicating via Pakistan. And we know that on the one side, Trump has put forward his 15-point plan, and on the other side, we have Iran's counter demands. Now, I can't say I'm a student of the art of the deal, but I have read around it. This is, not Trump himself writing. It's via a ghostwriter, but it is Trump. And his negotiating tactic, at least when it comes to real estate, is begin with an absolutely outrageous offer. I'll take it off your hands for sixpence, equivalent of that. And the other side is meant to be so shocked. But nonetheless, you end up with some sort of deal, not necessarily in the middle, but something that is acceptable and will profit you. That's Trump's version of it. And I actually would say that if you look at the 15 points, this is very much of that order. So Iran has to abandon its ballistic missiles, has to abandon its allies, such as the Houthis, such as Hezbollah. Iran has to put a stop to its nuclear enrichment program that's beyond anything that you could conceive of apart from civilian usage. And even then, there's a question mark over it. This is Trump maximum. On the other hand, I'm sure they've been reading The Art of the Deal. The Iranians have come up with their version of it, and they're demanding compensation. Here you are, you started the war, which is true. Look at the damage that you've done. You've got to pay us compensation. So who knows? As I said, it could be a combination of the two, degrade Iran's offensive, defensive capability, and meanwhile talk. They're not incompatible. The other story at the moment, apart from talks, is boots on the ground, and we have stories of Marines being on their way, Marines being ready to be deployed. We have also Iran saying that it's going to or has mobilized 1 million men to respond to any American move. Well, given the numbers of Marines, you don't need to be a military genius to work out that this is not a ground invasion of mainland Iran. That's just not going to happen. To hell with the million. You'd need more than 1 million to actually invade and take and hold a country the size of Iran. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, but that is the sort of thing that you'll be talking about. Remember, if you take the Iraq war, no surprise that America and its allies were able to get to Baghdad in no time whatsoever, just driving in tanks, aircraft, shock and awe, and all the rest of it. But even then, that took 140,000, something like that, American troops. So a few thousand Marines ain't going to do Iran. Iran is a much bigger country. It's got the Revolutionary Guard. It's got a population that clearly, at least seems to be militantly opposed to the United States and its invasion plans. So it's been pointed out to me, I didn't know the figures, but the figures don't surprise me. It's been pointed out to me that when it came, for example, to not only the invasion, but occupying Germany after World War II, I I think it was something like 2 million Soviet soldiers in the Eastern Zone, 4 million Allied soldiers in the Western Zone. Japan, a million American soldiers. There was resistance at a certain level in Germany, not the case in Japan, where the emperor announced surrender and lay down your arms. I mean, we all know the stories of fanatical Japanese troops committing suicide with that announcement. Nonetheless, America still committed 1 million troops to that. So the Marines ain't going to do it, and everyone knows it. We don't need to even think ground invasion in that sense. On the other hand, taking one island, two islands, three islands, that's conceivable. Maybe that would sort of demonstrate American power. My own guess, for what it's worth, is that knowing that that's a possibility, what would I be doing if I was an Iranian commander? I'd be mining the place. I'd be readying the place to blow it up sky high. Okay, so you land your Marines. Well, there'll be mines in the water, and when it comes to the the petrol chemical industry, for example, on Krog Island, I would expect that to be ignited, and I wouldn't fancy being a Marine, even if there's no military resistance from Iranian troops or Revolutionary Guard or whatever. And then you're a sitting target. This is a small little island. And what do? You launch what drones you've got, you launch what ballistic missiles you've got. You need to keep supplying these troops, I would have thought, with water, little things like that, things like fuel, munitions, who knows what. You've got to rotate them, not going to just leave them on that island. And so, you demonstrate your military superiority. And the danger is precisely in such an operation that you end up having to skedoodle with the proverbial tail in between your legs. So it's easily doable, but is it a serious proposition, or is it simply another threat that's being made? We're sending Marines, and this is meant to be a bargaining chip in the indirect negotiations that are clearly happening and would have been happening even if we knew nothing about negotiations. We'd still speculate that there must be diplomatic channels. Okay, and then we come to the question. I'm full of questions. I don't know. I don't think Yasmin's going to be answering all my questions, because I think that we don't know. We don't know. And the question I've got is, who will win? And my answer to that is, it depends on how you define winning. My own take on it would be that given the declared war aims, and there've been many different war aims, but the crucial one to me from Trump is regime change. I don't see it because you're not dealing with ground troops. Do we really think that Iran will surrender and say, yes, we're going to dismantle the Revolutionary Guards, we're going to abolish the position of supreme leader, we're going to hand over to someone, like the Shah's son? I can't see it. So I'm skeptical on that one. But if it survives, if the Iranian regime survives, I would call that a sort of victory for Iran. Now, it could survive precisely as the first supreme leader did when it came to the Iraq-Iran war. Drink the cup of poison and sign not Trump's 15-point plan, but something that the Iranian leadership, the Iranian regime would view as a humiliation, as they did the end of the Iraq Iran war. That's conceivable. But regime change against America, as I said, to survive, to me, is certainly a sort of victory. Now, Trump, being Trump, could claim, well, we got rid of the supreme leader. We killed the supreme leader. There's a new regime, and that's true. Here he is. He's clearly playing no supreme leader role. He doesn't seem to be able to talk in public. He doesn't seem to have his picture available in public. But I think it's stretching one, isn't it, to claim that having assassinated one Khomeini, you replace him with his son, and that represents a new regime. It's not regime as in any sense that I would understand the term. Individual, yes. Supreme leader, yes. But for regime, you're talking about the architecture of a particular ruling order. So I think it's quite conceivable that given the absence of ground troops, given the absence of plans for a ground invasion, the Iranian regime could survive. But maybe it will be forced. Speculation. Maybe, though, it will be forced to drink that cup of poison. Okay. So again, I would just speculate. So maybe, I mean, it's shown in the past that it was prepared to come to a deal on the nuclear question. It was Trump, remember, that walked out on the deal that they had, that had been carefully negotiated. It's possible that they could come to some agreement on the range of their missiles or something like that, or the number of missiles. It's possible that they could come to an arrangement on their relationship with Houthis and Hezbollah, maybe Hamas, if you want to include them as an ally. That's conceivable. So both sides could end up actually claiming a sort of victory. But as I said, my own take on it, and I'll be interested to see what Yasmin says. I don't think that I'm, to use a phrase, that you can deliver regime change from 20,000 feet. I just cannot see it, because a regime, no matter how many people you kill, no matter what damage you do to an infrastructure, can just simply carry on and saying, no, we don't surrender. How are you going to force a regime that takes that position to surrender? I don't think you can. So you can have a situation of where both sides claim victory, and then we have to judge. We have to then judge, whether, for example, this is enhanced America as the hegemon, or has it weakened it? And that will be, I would have thought, a judgment, as opposed to, well, the answer's transparent, it's clear, it's obvious. I suspect that the answer isn't going to be so obvious. Meanwhile, of course, we have the press, the media dominated by the Houthis. I personally think that we ought to just call them what they are, which is the government of Yemen. I mean, it controls the vast bulk of what used to be North and South Yemen. It controls the capital. It's clearly got armed force. It's withstood the Saudis and what Saudi Arabia could throw at it. It's just not recognized. The international community recognized some, tin pot load of X's who are located somewhere, I think in the south. I'm not quite sure. Either way, what we're dealing with here is not an insurgent movement, it's an established movement. And of course, it's launched off some missiles. I don't know how many last night. It was up to 2. I've been told they actually got through the Iron Dome. I could be wrong on that one, but it is a widening. It is an escalation. Why? It's not so much because of the missiles that can be delivered against Israel. It's again the shipping question, and predictably, of course, when Iran was attacked, We saw it retaliate not only with missiles against American allies, against Israel, and setting off drones. We also saw it effectively blocking the Strait of Hormuz. Well, okay, the Strait of Hormuz. Then what about the Red Sea? That's the Suez Canal. That's the short route into Europe to and from. Are you going to send your ship up there? What's the insurance rate going to be? It's going to go up at the very least. Okay, Israel can bomb the Houthis, maybe America joins in, maybe Britain joins in, but nonetheless, you've got drones. You can severely disrupt shipping. Now, that would have been expected by anybody planning this war in the Pentagon. I don't believe that the Pentagon didn't have a plan or several plans or many plans. And that would have included, look, the price of oil, the price of everything, because almost everything nowadays has some sort of oil base, that is going to go up. That's obvious. I just would add that this is an illustration of the price of oil having a huge political factor involved. I mean, do you remember people that used to be in the camp of peak oil, that apparently the world was running out of oil, and that's why the price of oil was going up? There's no evidence. I mean, of course, oil fields get exhausted. So in the North Sea is an example, not of it being exhausted, but it being depleted. But there's no evidence of the world running out of oil. I mean, all you need to do is look at Venezuela, for example. You could go into the Arctic and there's oil there. The problem is it costs $180 a barrel to drill it out. And given where the price of oil is today, even with this war shock, over $100, it's simply not economical. And this is also my comment on this crazy right-wing campaign that's being conducted by Reform and the Conservatives for the British government to agree to more licenses in the North Sea. It would make no difference whatsoever. And I'd also point out that oil company executives that might be contemplating it will also be, acutely aware that if there was the sort of peace that we've been talking about, either with Iran coming out on a judgment basis, having won, or America coming out on balance, having won, either way, you'd then expect the price of oil to tumble backwards. And therefore, would you invest your dollars, your shareholders' money in the North Sea? Well, you would if Britain was under siege, if we were talking about a war economy and, Britain being surrounded by hostile submarines or something like that, then you might well drill in the North Sea. But we're dealing with world prices. We're not dealing with local. The idea that you drill in the North Sea is just sort of the image that the tourists and the Reform are coming up, and that will supply your forecourt, your local garage. It's just risible. How they can get away with it, I don't know. Either way, what we're dealing with here is clearly predictable. But war, by its very nature, includes a very big, margin of unpredictability. Things can go swimmingly well. On the other hand, they usually have a habit of going disastrously badly. So who knows? We also have Lebanon. Israel is fighting, I don't know how many fronts you want to count it as, but it's not only fighting against Iran, it's not only fighting against the Palestinians on the West Bank and in Gaza, it's also fighting in Lebanon. And 4 million people have been displaced. And everything shows us that what Israel has in mind is establishing some sort of depopulated zone in southern Lebanon. the idea that that would protect northern Israeli towns, I just think is a nonsense. You just get rockets that have more fuel, don't you? You know, you just build rockets that can go a little bit further. So that's not that's not an answer. It's a sort of crazy logic, you know, imperial logic. So it's like, you know, the Golan Heights, which Israel seized for strategic reasons in '67, because you just see pictures of the Golan Heights and you can see all of Syria before you. Well, it's also worked the other way, that if you when it was Syrian, you can see all of Israel before you. So they seized that. What happened in the last round of violence in Syria? You protect you establish a buffer zone around your buffer zone. So the logic precisely is to expand, 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 because the enemy, you know, you might expel them from a particular piece of land, but unless you kill them all, the enemy, you know, have a terrible habit of keeping fighting. Okay, another question, and I sort of have an answer. Maybe I'm wrong, but let me ask the question. Why does the mainstream media keep painting a picture of Iran, stroke China, stroke Russia winning this war? And we're only into the war. I know Trump talked about weeks, but we're only into this war for about a month now. Why is the United States losing? Well, you could argue, as I've done, that the idea of regime change doesn't seem credible. But again, I've discussed what's winning, what's losing. But why this image of Iran winning? If I was looking at it from Iran, I'd say, well, as I've argued, you know, if we survive, we've sort of won. But meanwhile, basic industry is being wiped out. So I've been told, this is internal, I know, Yasmin, so forgive me, but you know, the steel industry has been attacked. Higher education has been attacked. That doesn't look like a good position. We're in a strong. Iran is incredibly weak militarily. Okay, it can send off missiles to its nearer board, but it can't do much else other than block shipping, for example. Okay, well, my argument here, I don't think it's part of a conspiracy, but it's a sort of game that journalists maybe can be bought into. Maybe they've been sort of bought on side, but it does work with the idea that what Europe needs to do, what Britain needs to do, is devote more towards what is euphemistically called defense spending, armies. Why? Because here you are, the United States is losing. The United States, a big story going around, is just about to abandon NATO. Trump is going to do a deal with Putin. I mean, it's possible. I've speculated, but the deal here, the art of the deal is that Russia breaks with China. I'm extremely skeptical of whether that's going to happen. But the point I'm really making here is that the message it sends out is America is no longer a reliable ally. The peace dividend following the collapse of the Soviet Union has gone. We're now back in, at the very least, into the Cold War, and perhaps we're facing, because they can't think beyond this, we're now facing our oncoming 1939 moment. So we need to get our version of Spitfires and Hurricanes together. This sort of pushing at the public. Owen Jones has joined in on that, saying America, attacking Iran, this is not the way to shore up your hegemony, isn't it? I would have thought it's quite a good way of shoring up your hegemony. I mean, when I look at least Venezuela, I would say that's a good illustration of America, or what's going on in Cuba. Electricity cuts. I think that's an illustration. Has China come to the rescue of Venezuela? Has Russia come to the rescue of Venezuela? What about Russia? What about Iran? Has it come? No one's come to the rescue of these countries. Okay, we have the story. I'm sure it's right that Russia's been sending Iran intelligence, but planes, boats, not to my knowledge. Not for a long time. I'm not saying that its air force doesn't have some Russian planes, but is it doing the equivalent of Russia or Soviet Union with the Cuban Missile crisis? No. And we all know about the deal that was done between Khrushchev and Kennedy. You know. Anyway, my version of it is actually, of course, that I don't think that the decline of the hegemon is linear. I don't think it's just straightforwardly down. I don't buy into the idea either that if America loses, depending on what loses looks like, it means that China has a pushover when it comes to Taiwan. I just can't. But this is the sort of image that's been manufactured or, how should I put it, manipulated. I don't know. So yeah, I'm constantly reminded of Saddam Hussein, who was an evil genius that was pulling a fast one constantly on the West. Poor old West, just about to launch, wasn't he, his weapons of mass destruction on London or something like that. And I can remember, not because I was politically conscious, but there were documentaries and newsreels of 1956 and that evil man Nasser, the second, or was he the third or the first, or I can't remember what number he was, but he was another Adolf Hitler who was just about to do something terrible to Western civilization. Well, he survived, of course, but he survived crucially because of American intervention. And that was definitively the end of any pretense in Britain to being the world's third power, which was the ambition of both Labour and conservative governments. So the way I look at it is that the United States is extremely dangerous and remains dangerous. And remember, when it comes to Taiwan, this is a piece of China. This is legally recognized as part of China. Indeed, it wasn't that long ago that it was Taiwan that had the UN seat, for example. So anyway, that's just my own take on things. Okay, I'm now shifting from Iran. We're going to come back to Iran. I'm going to talk about the demonstration yesterday in London. A number of us here on this call went to it. The organizers say that it was 500,000. The police say it was 50,000. I'm not going to say, oh, it was somewhere in between. I don't know. I used to judge demonstrations and how long it took them to take, to pass me by. And you would work out, you'd count, for 10 minutes or 5 minutes and, do some rough and ready. The police will have helicopters, but from my experience, 50,000 doesn't really work. Anyway, I can give you my experience because as the official, unofficial weekly worker photographer, I followed the front of the demonstration all the way to Whitehall. Right. And so I had to keep catching up with the front, taking pictures, getting nice angles and all the rest of it. But I reached Whitehall and then I walked back all the way to where the demonstration started, and it was still coming. So I walked from Whitehall all the way back to Hyde Park Corner, and I saw the end of the demonstration. For what it's worth, I don't know how many people that adds up to, other than saying lots. And so there were different blocks. And what struck me, and that's how the organizers wanted it to look, someone who sees the demonstration go past, the first block, other than the lead block, were trade unions. And I was impressed by the number of different trade union banners, different trade union floats, the number of trade unionists, and not just full-timers. There's not enough full-timers in the GMB or the PCS to staff the entire, numbers of the delegation. They were impressive in terms of the range of unions and the size of the contingent. So particularly what stands out to me, PCS, their band, their float, That was good. GMB stands out. The Education Union, UCU, particularly stood out in my mind. So lots of trade unionists were there, which is different to the Palestinian demonstrations. I'm not saying that there weren't or aren't trade unionists on it, but in terms of an overt trade union presence, this march was different to the Palestinian demonstrations I'd been on in central London. And then we had, I wouldn't say the others, but you had then different blocks of, for example, anti-interventionist but anti-royalist Iranians. You had a Christian contingent. I spoke to the Christian contingent, the vicar there. You had Quakers there. I had a chat with a lot of the comrades there. You had, I liked them, a sort of punky version of Morris dancers there. You had the political organizations there. Spew looked particularly weak. I was impressed by the size of the RCP contingent and its militancy. I was impressed by the size, actually, of the CPB contingent with its new general secretary. A good turnout from them. I was particularly impressed by the SWP, that was not only having its own contingent, SWP, but was also, one presumes, responsible for stand up to racism, women against the far right. They put a lot of organizing into this demonstration and building up support. And clearly, they were recruiting people to front it, no doubt, but clearly the SWP was the organizing intelligence on these delegations. Also, at the end, and again, this was new, the Greens, not just a banner, used to that, not just a few placards, but banner after banner after banner with people behind it. So they made up, I don't know whether it was the last contingent, but they were towards the end, but they were a significant presence. And again, as a seasoned observer of demonstrations, I went to myself, both with the CPB, but also with the Greens in particular. I went, they must have people that come from the SWP who've joined the Greens because they've taken SWP demonstration culture with them. I don't think this is I've not seen the Greens organize like the SWP before, including the slogans and how you organize a contingent. So maybe I'm adding, one on one together and making three, but I don't think so. So this was a demonstration with a very wide pool being drawn upon. But then we come to the politics. Now, it's true that when you come to the SWP as the SWP, they pose very militantly. So they aren't out with slogans of love, hope, and unity. Their slogan is smash Tommy Robinson, smash Reform and Nigel Farage. RCP, similar, but they weren't the organizers of the demonstration. Okay, the question then is, what were the politics of the demonstration? Overwhelmingly of the hope, of the love, of the unity sort, to the extent that the Church of England, I did check it out, the Church of England establishment on Piccadilly itself had that slogan on its church door. And the question I would pose to the comrades is really this, that we're in a situation where the world is moving to the right, and all you need to do is look at the latest State Department strategy document. I think it's from 2026, I presume throughout Trump's remaining term. So I think that goes to 2030. And this basically has a commitment to spend money and to promote what is called the far right. Now, I remember the US promoting neoliberalism, but I also lived through the US promoting right-wing social democracy to the point that it became hegemonic in Western Europe and in Britain. I mean, as a school kid, I can remember teachers looking down their noses at me if I used the word capitalism. Don't you know, Sonny Jim, that we don't live under capitalism anymore? This is right-wing social democracy. We're going towards socialism. Capitalism is putting up kids up chimneys. That's Dickensian. So we're now moving away, obviously, from social democracy, beyond neoliberalism, to white nationalism, to the right wing patriotism. So yeah, you can have tactical voting, you can have big demonstrations, but we're dealing precisely with the US hegemon pushing this agenda, and there will be money, big money, and there will be paid persuaders that will be put in post in universities, who will be writing papers, who will be buying papers to precisely promote this agenda. So Paul Damarty in the paper speculates about peak reform, maybe, but meanwhile, politics in Britain continues to move to the right. Now, I'm only going to take up a couple of more minutes now, and then we can hand over. Just thought it was worthwhile commenting, having mentioned the Greens, big presence. I'm absolutely gobsmacked to be told that their spring conference wasn't a delegate conference. I looked it up. Apparently, anyone who's a member of the Greens can turn up. Now, okay, nowadays it's not turning up to Blackpool or Brighton or Scarborough or somewhere like that. It's online. And what they had at their spring conference, in spite of Zach being at the front of this demonstration yesterday, they had 1,000 people. This is the Daily Telegraph reporting it. 1,000 out of 220,000 members. What the hell is going on there? Maybe it's so boring and frustrating that that's all they. I just don't. I mean, I am sort of like amazed. Either way, they didn't vote for the notorious resolution E12 that was talked out. There were something like 6 points of order. This is moved by the Jewish Greens. I would call them Zionist Greens. And this is about the nature of Israel. What is Zionism? And I'll simply say this, that, I read up some of the debate around this E12 question on the Bright Green website. And I read an article by someone who said, I'm a militant anti-Zionist, and this is why I'm voting against this resolution. And on the sidebar, they had Greens adopt the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism. And I went, I know that must be old. It was, I think, 2020, 2021. This was Caroline Lucas. And the significance of that adoption was precisely the Green Party, only with one MP at the time, but announcing itself as we're a safe pair of hands if it comes to coalition negotiations. We are an insider party. Now, Zach Polanski hasn't made that choice. He was on the demonstration, and his reply, his answer about this E12, well, it depends what you mean by Zionism. Well, it does indeed depend on what you mean by Zionism, but he will be forced to make a choice. If he makes the wrong choice, he would be a political outsider. He will be viewed as dangerous, and he will be done or treated in that way. And you can see the pressure on him. The right media is chipping away various councillors, defecting, and scraping the bottom of the barrel was the Daily Mail. I know you might say, well, you'd expect that from the Daily Mail, but what about this as a story? Did you know that in Zach Polanski's extended family, I repeat, extended family, someone not named has denounced him for wanting to introduce an Islamic state in Britain? And you just go, well, if you took Jack Conrad's extended family, I'm sure you can find someone who says all sorts of horrible things about me. Like, so what? But this is the sort of shit that's being thrown. And of course, you've got Labour MPs now lining up demanding of Polanski that he expels his anti-Semitic wing who've come in to his party. And I'll finish with this. This is the Daily Telegraph that used to pride itself on being a paper of fact. It would separate its news stories, which are fact, from its commentary. And so you read the news and you say, that's reliable. That's how you now read the news. And I just go, this is garbage. And so we have one journalist saying more or less this. I'm paraphrasing, but you could look it up. This is their coverage of the Green Party conference, that it's saying, with the rise of the Green Party, we know, massive expansion of membership under Zach Polanski, massive increase, that there's been a rise in anti-Semitism, basically putting an equal sign between the two. And you go, well, it's like correlation isn't causal. There's a huge difference between correlating something and saying, well, this is doing this and this is doing that. But to join, I mean, it's an implication, and that's why it's dishonest journalism. The implication is there that somehow the rise of the Green Party is responsible for the burning of these 4 ambulances and all the other. Now, there's no question that in Britain and globally, that anti-Semitism is on the rise. There can be absolutely no, I mean, I don't need to do a survey. Maybe we could find out percentages and then how you judge it. But of course it is. And when you have a state, the so-called Jewish state, which acts on behalf of all Jews, it's not surprising that people who are politically backward go, if this is the Jewish state, then it's Jews who are responsible. Stupid. The anti-imperialism or anti-Zionism of fools, call it whatever you will, that is happening. But the idea that anti-Zionists in the Green Party, I'm sure you can find someone who's an anti-Semite, but in the same way in the Labour Party, this is a big lie. That, when Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, there was not a rise in anti-Semitism because of that. That is simply untrue. And the left certainly has a responsibility, certainly has a duty to combat anti-Semitism. But we also have a duty, I think, to combat the big lie, which is anti-Semitism equals anti-Zionism. And that has never been true, isn't true, and will never be true. Israel is a racist project, and the logic of Zionism, when it takes state form, is genocidal. It is about removing the people of the land. I'll finish on that one, Stan. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Well, it's a two-hand meeting, as you say, so we've got 2 openings. Yasemin's going to talk about what's going on in Iran. Carry on, Yasemin.
Okay, thanks very much. I hope it won't take too long. I think what everyone is talking about is, at least amongst Iranians, is the surprise that the state has lasted this long, right? So, and there hasn't been a collapse. It's not just Israel selling a lie, as J.D. Vance keeps saying to Trump. A lot of Iranians, opposition Iranians, left and right, were predicting that the regime was collapsing even before the war, even before we reached this military attack. And that hasn't happened. And in some ways, for Iran, that and its allies, people who support it wherever they are, mainly in the global south, for those people, its survival is a victory. And I don't think we can underestimate that. However, how long it can maintain power inside Iran is still questionable, because the destruction is nothing like what you hear. It's far more widespread. It's affecting daily life. It is affecting infrastructure, and therefore, first of all, the effects will be very long term, but also in terms of economy, in terms of day-to-day life, life is becoming quite difficult. The initial thought was Ali Khamenei is dead. There will be an internal power struggle. The structures will collapse. We clearly realize, I think most Iranians now accept that our nominated supreme leader isn't quite a supreme leader. Sorry, there is an echo. Can someone mute themselves? I think it's you, Stan. No? So the question remains, who holds power in all of this gap? It's not just that we can't see the supreme leader. It's not just that his health is in doubt. They can't even show a still picture of him. So there is something seriously wrong here. However, as I've said before, his nomination shows continuity, and that is all that matters. I don't think inside Iran people are very concerned by CIA comments about his sexuality, homosexuality, or whatever. I think most people are more concerned that he's not seen. However, the state is staying. There is clearly the government is functioning, the military is functioning. How can we explain this? On the one hand, I think IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, is very much a power, an authority. It has many layers. It's not just a military force. It is the force that has allies in the parliament. Not that the parliament can meet regularly these days, but it still does. It holds power in the economy, in the infrastructure. It is involved in global trade. And because of these reasons, it is in a position to, if you like, maintain order inside the country. Having said that, they also have, I should add, they also have influence in the judiciary, they have influence in the regional administration, and they control vast networks of Iran's economy. What we are seeing, according to many people, is now formalization of that embedded power into a system that is governing the country. In terms of their military operations, this is a very decentralized structure that people underestimated. So every key position within Iran's Revolutionary Guard has a designated replacement. If one person is removed through assassination, strike, or anything, another one immediately takes their place. In other words, the system is designed to function headless. And this has surprised, amongst others, Mr. Trump, and presumably it has even surprised the Israelis. The war room has a different structure. There is something called a strategic command, Khatam al-Anbiya. Khatam al-Anbiya means the last prophet. And Khatam al-Anbiya war room coordinates the activities of IRGC's commanders with the army. In a way, this shows this broader shift from clerical dominance to working with non-religious bodies, such as the army, which is now playing quite an important part in the war. In terms of a middle layer, we have peoples that at various times, the European and the US press name as the people Trump is supposedly talking. From what I can gather, Trump isn't talking to anyone in particular. There might be messages passed to various people, but I don't think they have responded in the way that the US expected. So Larry Johnny, the man who was killed last week, was, according to Times, the man Trump was talking to. This is even before he was killed. And of course, now there are a lot of rumors that Israel killed him because he was going to be the strong man. Now, there's a lot of talk about Ghalibaf. I mentioned him in my last article, former IRGC commander, former police chief, former mayor of Tehran, and someone who has his hand in every financial corrupt system you can think of. He's not very, I don't think he's that popular with ordinary Iranians. When he was mayor of Tehran, his claim to fame was that he created prosperity and rebuilt North Tehran, the affluent part, at the expense of leaving the poor unattended in the south of the capital. There is clearly still a cabinet. We have Pezeshkian as the president. He seems to be given the task of running public services, economic administration, domestic infrastructure. I don't see him being involved in war strategy or major geopolitical decisions. Again, there are a lot of rumors, some of them by the Pakistani mediators, that Israel had told Trump we can eliminate Pezeshkian and his foreign minister Araghchi, and Trump advisors told him you'll be only left with Revolutionary Guard commanders, and that's why he told Israel not to do it. This doesn't mean that Israel necessarily will keep to this agreement with Trump. We have seen them going their own way when it's necessary. A lot has been destroyed in Iran. Some of it is military, the Parchin military industrial complex, places such as the Shahrud missile and space site, gas turbines that could have been used for military purposes, but there are also major infrastructure being destroyed. Steel plants in Khuzestan, Esfahan, Ahvaz, Bagh-e-Shahr. These are major parts of Iran's infrastructure in terms of the economy. Cement production in Firuzabad, oil facilities, as you know, and now and energy infrastructure. And of course, you all know about the threat by Trump that it was first 48 hours, then it was 5 days, now it's 10 days. And the Iranian government, I think, has seen through this. They're saying it's not 5 days, it's not 10 days. He's just waiting for the land troops to get there, and we will have a land invasion of Khark Island. So they are prepared. Now, when it comes to land invasion, I think people should, I hope someone around Trump has told him that Iran has quite a bit of experience in that in the Eight-Day War. That's how they won the war. And the way they do it is with human waves that confront the enemy forces. Quite a lot die, but then that wave is replaced by another wave. And that's what they did for liberating Khorramshahr. Khorramshahr was occupied by Saddam. So I would imagine that 1,000 Marines, today is 350, apparently it will go up to 1,000. And then Khark Island. Okay, you have occupied Khark Island and these smaller islands near that. Does that give you complete control of the Strait of Hormuz? I don't think so, and I will explain in a minute. The Israeli attacks and the US attacks, apart from the terrible destruction of schools, primary schools, and so on, has also deliberately targeted hospitals. two of Tehran's major hospitals have been destroyed. In the countries, there is at least 13 hospitals that have been bombed, 77 healthcare centers and emergency centers. Now, this is, according to Iranian medics, the kind of policy Israel was following in Gaza. Long-term health deterioration will follow. It's not just that the war injured won't be able to get to a hospital. We are talking of slow deaths, what people call slow deaths, because people in the long term will not have proper medical facilities. In terms of ordinary people, I must admit the social media pictures I see, the phone calls I receive, tell me of absolute resilience. People keep telling me, oh, don't worry about us, we are fine. I'm not sure if they're saying this to keep us calm there, but what you see is shops that have food. You see shopkeepers, stall holders with big signs saying, if you can't afford to pay, just come and get what you need. You can pay later, which I find quite amazing. There are queues of people giving blood. My relatives keep telling me we keep queuing, but the queue is so long we give up because we don't think we'll get there in the daytime. There are people who volunteer to find the dead, the injured. There is, I would assume, quite a loss of faith for anyone who supported military action as a way of getting rid of this government. And here it's surprising that BBC Radio 4 constantly seems to find people who say the opposite of what I hear from everybody I talk to. Why is that? I was thinking, and in fact, I noticed Alex Kalinikos had put a text, a X message saying, where do they find these people, PM Radio 4? And I was thinking about this, and I finally found the reason. So an internet card for less than 5 minutes costs about $15 to $20, the equivalent of $15 to $20. So you can imagine that the worker in the steel plants I mentioned, whose relatives are mourning his death, are not going to waste $15 talking to BBC Persian, who then reports this, translates this for PM radio. There is clearly an agenda on BBC Middle East side to portray this war as something that still some people in Iran want or welcome. And here it's interesting. They had another reporter on the Iran-Turkey border, and he kept seeing people going into Iran. And he was asking them, why are you going back? And they were saying, we are going back to defend our country. So you can see that there are exceptions to this. And because I know some people listen to this, I would give great credit to Nafise Kohnavar, BBC Persian reporter in the Middle East, in Lebanon at times nearer the border. She's doing an excellent job. I'm surprised they haven't sacked her or the Israelis haven't killed her. Let's hope they don't. I mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is important. You know that all of this escalation is because in the past, about 60 to 40 ships used to pass through this daily. Of course, now the traffic is near zero. My understanding from asking various web pages, shipping companies, is that 90 ships have crossed since the blockade began. So that's 30 days ago, that's 3 ships a day, as opposed to 60 to 140. There are 150 ships that are physically stranded near the Strait of Hormuz. And there are up to 2,000 vessels that are affected by this as we speak. So they are globally delayed, rerouted, or they are waiting to see what would happen. Iran keeps saying, well, the passage is not closed, it's open, it's permission-based. And they're saying we won't stop any tanker, any ship, unless it's with the enemy, which is Israeli and US. The complexity here is that, say, a ship is going to Qatar, to Oman, to Oman less because it's further south. A ship is going to Kuwait. Are these considered allies of US and therefore they can't go through? I know that in the last few days, a number of ships have been paying bribes. They have paid fees. Their governments have done so, or the company have done so. Last Thursday, a figure of $2 million was mentioned for anyone wanting to go through. And of course, Iran is accumulating any money it can. It's selling oil, by the way, because the sanctions are over the oil. And it's selling 1.5 million barrels of oil more than it did before the war started. But the Strait of Hormuz geographically is difficult to control except through Iran. Why? There's 300, 400 kilometers of coastline along this strait, all Iranian territory. The narrowest point, as you know, is 33 kilometers. So it's and the shipping lane is about 3 kilometers each way. So Iran has control of a large chunk of the coastline. So having land troops in Hague, I don't think will work, but I'm sure brilliant strategist that is Mr. Donald Trump, he has known how to do this. I think it's one of those exaggerated plans that might come to defeat him, to affect him badly. There is also another strategic escalation. It's Bab el-Mandab. Iran has the possibility of expanding the conflict. It will need help from its allies, the Houthis. They're quite angry. They're not just Iran's proxy. They're also worried about the future of the region, because if Iran collapses, most of these countries like Qatar, Kuwait, or Saudi Arabia will become part of the Arab Accord. We will have a greater Israel. The Houthis are opposed to that. They have been one of the defenders of the Palestinians in the region. So I think if that happens, they will help Iran, and they might be in a good position to stop that. Why is Bab el-Mandab important? It connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. It provides access to the Suez Canal, and therefore it's actually it may be more, I would say, much more significant than the Strait of Hormuz. In terms of the economic cost of the war, people are only talking about oil, but there are a number of other items that are becoming short and apparently will have dramatic effect on the world economy. Fertilizer is the first one of those. Fertilizer is a byproduct of oil, and already US and West European farmers are complaining about this. My understanding is that even if things are resolved now, it will have an effect of up to 5% on fruits and vegetables and more on grain. So we are already facing that. Helium is another material tied to gas production. It's used in MRI machines. It's used in mobile phones. There are other medical, pharmaceutical derivatives from oil, methanol, ethylene. These are apparently there's a shortage, sulfur, and so on. So I think even if everything goes well, this war has created a major economic problem for the countries of the region and for the world economy. And here we also have to remember that relations between the Persian Gulf countries and US is extremely tense. They have been bearing the damages that Iran couldn't inflict on US because of the distance or Israel. However, clearly a lot of them think they have not been defended as much as they should. I have said this before, there is what Jeremy Bowen of the BBC calls it diversity in looking into the future. And he explained this diversity by looking at China. And here, my understanding is that the Saudis have been talking to China in the last 2 weeks. That might explain the extremely crude and rude comments by Trump about his former best friend in the Middle East, Ben Salman, on Friday. He said, we can destroy them, and he used all sorts of flowery language. In terms of Israel, we don't know about the damage because reporters, including BBC, other people who are there, are not allowed to report. The damage is far less than Iran. Let me stress, it's in terms of deaths, we are talking of low dozens as opposed to at least 2,000-3,000 in Iran. Injuries are in the hundreds. Again, in Iran, we are talking of tens of thousands. A number of cities have been hit, Tel Aviv, Ramat, Beit Shemesh. However, it has been less. Here, the question of how many interceptors there are, how many can Israel afford to keep this going for long term, is the difference in price between the drones Iran uses and what Israel has, creating a problem for Israel? I don't know. But clearly, things aren't as rosy as Netanyahu and his government try to present. We know that some buildings have been destroyed, neighborhoods have been hit. We know that one missile reached Dimona. It's debatable whether it was Iran or the Houthis, but it was brought down, but it did reach it. There is a major industrial complex in Naut Hoa, which is on fire today. I've seen videos. So, of course, Israel has a lot of advantages, early warning systems, the Iron Dome, extensive shelter network, but it doesn't, we see from some of the Israeli TV's own presentations, various channels, the fact that mayors are coming and saying this war has to end. We can't keep going like this. There are far too many calls for people to go to shelter. Ordinary life is being damaged. We can't keep an ordinary life. And there are, you can see this in some of the anti-war protests, which remain very small. I think the Israeli population was very much in favor of this war as on the whole, but it has gone through some changes in this. In terms of opposition inside Iran, I think it's very difficult for anyone to do much. We keep talking to comrades who are involved in local neighborhood councils, neighborhood organizing, and so on. They do tell us that security is severe, but it's not effective, i.e. the state wants to be very much a show of force, warning people not to gather and so on. But in practice, they have other things to do. All of this creates a situation where the current state can remain as a militarized force. It will face permanent crises, and it might become worse than what it was on the 28th of February, in that a supreme leader who was a mediator between various factions and the IRGC and a so-called elected president will be replaced by a real hardline IRGC commander type state. Whether that can survive, I have no idea. So both the survival of the regime and its fall leave very dark scenarios. You can't find anyone on the Iranian left who would give you a rosy picture of the immediate aftermath of this war. Having said that, as I mentioned before, personally, I'm very impressed by the resilience. I'm very impressed by the fact that a kind of solidarity for human life, solidarity to safeguard human life, to help each other, to go and find people under the rubbles, individuals taking major risks to do that, exists. And all of this will disappear unless the committees that are being formed, the neighborhood cooperations that is being organized, the workers who are organizing in there. Quite a lot of workers live quite near or in the immediate vicinity of their factories with their family. Unless things can be built on that, we are looking at very dark scenarios indeed. I'm sorry, I can't be more positive, and I'll finish here. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. That's very interesting stuff. And we're into discussion now, comrades, about both sections of the openings. So I'm looking for raised hands. I know that Mickey Mitch wants to be transferred, and I think maybe not sure if he's got there yet to be a panelist. So if you're there, yes, Alex Green is asking too to be made into a panelist in order to speak. Okay. So I hope the host or co-host will deal with that. So I'm looking for hands. If you can raise your hand under the react icon, reaction or react. Then
John
do that.
Ryan and Alex Green.
Thank you. If not, if you can't raise your hand, you might just speak up, please, because we want to get on with the discussion. And I can't see any hands yet. Okay. There's John Ryan. Are you trying to speak, John?
Yeah, hi comrades. Just
Carry
a
on.
very brief one, because I think Yasmina already touched on it with Radio 4. I just wonder, Jack, would he agree, or is it a very quick statement like that? To me, anyway, even the coverage of yesterday and the coverage of related matters for the last 3 or 4 weeks and mainstream news, that BBC has sort of reached a new low.
That was quick. Anybody else? I think
if you raised your hand and you're now a panelist, you have to raise your hand again. I think in the process you lose your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't mind about the hands if people want to speak up, but Alex or yeah, never mind. Mike's here now. Mike McNair. Carry on.
Just a very short point about this. The question of the mainstream BBC and the mainstream media. It really has been, the BBC is a state broadcasting channel. It acts in the interests of the British state. It was set up to act in the interests of the British state. And it always has acted in the interests of the British state. And these have become, as it were, sharper in the past period, and increasingly the political line. And it's not just the BBC. We haven't got the named denotice regime, but we have got security service direction of the advertising funded media, as well as the direction of the BBC. And the moment, in fact, the moment which sort of shifted it was the anti-war movement around Iraq, where the a section of the British state apparatus tried to pursue an independent line from the United States. And at that point, we get the IHRA definition, we get, but also the French and the Germans attempted to pursue an independent line from the United States. We get the IHRA definition. We get a massive stepping up of directive intervention in relation to what can be reported, how it can be reported, what weight it can be given. And truth is the first casualty of war. Famously, truth is the first casualty of war. But that's what we're seeing now. That's it.
Yes, there's no more hands, but there's still a question of Alex and Mickey Mitch, Alex Green and Mickey Mitch, both appear to
Send you a
be.
message. Mickey's not in the meeting anymore, and Alex. Oh, there
I'm
he is.
here. Yeah.
Alex is here now as well.
Yeah.
Carry on, Alex.
Thank you. Well, there's a lot of things to try to react to. I think I find it very, very hard to understand from more than one of these meetings why the presenters, very frequently Jack Conrad, find it so puzzling or do not cannot integrate into their comments the fact that there are actually, number one, deep internal tensions within and between different sections of the American ruling class, and number two, that there is a great deal of evidence of tensions between different jockeying imperialist powers, even though the United States is clearly overwhelmingly hegemonic in terms of its current military position. So I think the thing that links those 2 points is that the position of the United States is not as strong as it was, and the United States is tussling with exactly how to position itself in a world where it is losing power. And of course, that I think that Jack is quite right to say that that makes the United States very dangerous. The United States has not lost for a minute its willingness to use violence, and in fact may be more willing to actually use violence, to actually engage in military adventures and so forth, than has been the case, less judicious, if you like. But I think that those are not necessarily symptoms of some kind of uniform, continuing hegemonic position. They're actually symptoms of a position which is being shaken in many ways. And this point about the divisions inside the American ruling class keeps coming up. I mean, we have basically the Democrats, the historical, sort of Trumpist position. We've got the neoconservatives. We've got, differing alliances and shifting formations around these questions between these different groupings. At the time of the American elections, the neoconservatives were in a very clear block with Biden and the Democrats, and I think that probably extended into the views of the much of the intelligence community in inverted commas. We now have a situation where there are divisions inside the Republican Party about whether or not this should actually, that they should be engaged in the war that's being carried out here, and both of those things relate to how to relate to the Ukraine. Now, the question there is that has been a point of extraordinarily sharp conflict inside the American ruling class. It is not the case that there is just a United States interest, and and you can see that in what's going on at the moment with this war around Iran, or the war against Iran, which is that one of the deals that's on offer is basically to Putin. I mean that you leave us alone with Iran, and we'll leave you alone when it comes to this resolution of the war in the Ukraine, and we'll make sure that you get the Donbass. Now, you don't have to offer or demand a complete separation from China to begin the process of trying to detach the Ukraine from China. And that brings us to the European powers, because it is not the case that far rightism is some kind of made in America phenomenon. The phenomenon of the you know, ever closer to fascism approach to and the increasing attacks on bourgeois democracy in countries like Germany or France or Spain completely antedate the rise of Trump. There is a relationship between them. There are commonalities between them. There are parallels, but these are independent powers, and they're trying to become more powerful and more independent. And I think that the AfD in Germany, in particular, is something that, and Rassemblement National in France, that those two are two key countries where we might add reform into that picture. The whole scenario that we currently look at is dependent on the likes of Macron, Starmer, and Merz, who are at the end of their rope. If you change the nature of the regimes in Europe, you change the nature of the kind of the potential deals that could be done between America and the European powers. And it's quite possible to have a situation where the United States permits Germany to become the dominant power, as long as Germany will do a deal with Russia, which will then begin that process of trying to attack Russia from China. And I think, in summary, there is an underestimation here of the depth and severity of what is taking place. It's like a kind of echo of the neo-Spartacists. You know, there are no inter-imperialist rivalries, and I think that this is completely out of place. Just one comment about the situation in this country and the demonstration that took place yesterday. You didn't mention it. There was for the first time, and possibly for the last time, a Your Party block on the demonstration yesterday. I think it was probably in the order of 250 to 300 people, very, very loosely organized and so forth. I think that, however, although that was a kind of, you know, a demonstration of existence, what's actually going on now is the very last phase, the very sort of you know, terminal existence of anything resembling sort of independent organization, independent of the sort of Corbyn populace. And in that regard, I just wanted to raise something that I think deserves further and more discussion in general. Jack Conrad and Mike McNair had a very interesting exchange, a very short one, at a fringe meeting that took place at the founding conference of Your Party. Mike McNair said, I think we're dealing with, you know, British road to socialism, the continuity of the old alternative economic strategy, the position of the old broad left and so forth. It's still the dominant position. And Jack Conrad said, no, I think that what we're actually looking at with what Corbyn's doing is more like the Demos 2.0. That discussion, I think, is a very important one, because I believe we are a long way down the road to the destruction of the historically understood Labour movement by left populism. And I think that this requires a lot more examination and has a lot to do with what are the tasks of today, because we are increasingly seeing a situation where things that have been assumed and were fought for in the early 20th century and sort of came to a certain head in terms of the Labour Party in around 1918 because of the impact of the October Revolution, are being pushed backwards. That we are, you know, the notion of a progressive, you know, class alliance and so forth has substantially displaced the notion that the working class should come to power on a socialist program.
Thanks, Alex. That it? Yep.
Yeah. So thank you.
Okay, I'm looking for hands. There's no hands up. Is anybody wants to shout out if they can't raise their hand? Okay. No. Okay. Over to the Jack or Yasmin. Jack.
Tobias has got his hand up.
Oh, there you are, Tobias. Toby first.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, you can hear me. Yeah. It was I wanted to say something because of the IHRA thing and its impact in Italy, which is not something that you're probably all that aware of, that a law, I'm not clear whether it's passed or going to be passed, assuming that we don't have an early election here, which is a possibility, but I won't get into that one. That there's something which was passed in Parliament. I don't think it's necessarily yet, it's not yet law, but it was it was supposed to be a law against anti-Semitism, right? And basically what it was doing was adopting the IHRA definition of what anti-Semitism was. I would like to point out, since I think some of you people on occasions have been very critical of Ellie Schlein, who is the leader of the PD. And I wouldn't agree with everything she's ever done by any means, but she was against this, against adopting the IHRA position. And though some of the right wing of the PD voted along with the governing parties in favour of this law, or something that is on the way to becoming a law, she did take a stand against it. I mean, she's anti-Netanyahu. She's been pretty good on Gaza. She won't ever actually use the word genocide, but this is obviously a tactical matter because it would inflame the right wing even more than they are inflamed about her. I mean, they dislike her on other issues as well. Look, she is, you know, if you look at it objectively, mild social democrat maybe, but I mean, they regard her as radical left, and why the hell did she ever become leader? And so that it is possible, I'm saying, you know, for somebody who's not on the far left to actually take a decent stance against the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And I mean, I think Ellie does get a certain amount of anti-Semitic abuse. This isn't made very clear, you know, on the surface, but the reason, look, that she doesn't get higher ratings than Conte of M5S when they do the sort of things of which leaders do you like, that sort of stuff. That she's always coming lower down. I mean, Maloney up till now has come top, but whether she will continue after their referendum defeat the other week, I don't know. But the reason I think that Ellie doesn't do as well as her party does in these sort of polls is because she's perceived as Jewish. You know, she's got a Jewish dad. Whether, you know, she, I think, doesn't want to describe herself as Jewish. There's an interview some years ago, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. She's seen that way. So, you know, you're talking about someone who, you know, is as Jewish as I am anyway. Okay, her mother didn't convert like mine did, but anyway. That she takes a stance against the Zionist lot and is doing so not in a far left party. So I think it can be done. In terms of the general thing about the far right, I mean, it is interesting that the Maloney has lost a referendum which was aiming to change the constitution and to weaken the power of the judiciary. I don't want to get into the technicalities, but you can see the parallels with Trump, the parallels with Hungary, the parallels with Poland in terms of you weaken the judiciary as against the executive. But she's been defeated. And it may be that her defeat, you know, I'm only saying might, have a knock-on effect, because obviously she was the first of these sort of leaders to come into office. I won't use the word power. I know that would be not something you'd want me to say. And I don't actually think power in that sense, but came into office before RN, which, you know, could come in next. The AFD would, you know, be after RN if they do come into office. But if an Italian any kind of Italian defeat for the far right, I think, could have an effect on France and Germany as well. Look, I'm not going to say anything about a British demonstration since I wasn't actually there. Haven't been in Britain for getting on for a year now at all. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Oh, I suppose the other thing is I'm glad Yasmin commented about the BBC Radio 4 voices from Iran, because I thought, why the hell do these people always come and seem to take this sort of pro-Israeli, pro-Shah Sun line? Though, to be fair on the BBC, they did this afternoon do a World This Weekend thing, which was talking about the effects on fertilizers and food and so forth for the world economy that would be caused by this war. Also, to be fair to them, it's quite obvious from the way individual BBC journalists talk about Trump. They use euphemisms, but they basically think he's off his rocker or demented, in the stages of dementia or something like that. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks, Toby. I've got to Paul Fleurs. Paul Fleurs, please.
Right. Yeah. Put on from what Alex was saying about the question of Ukraine in the situation of the international framework. I think that's mentioned.
You've gone muted, Paul.
Oh.
Suddenly switched over a few words ago.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're okay now.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Yeah, what Alex was saying about the position of Ukraine within this whole sort of question of the Middle East. I mean, we've seen Zelensky trying to offer his services as a drone expert, precisely at the time when Russia's launched its biggest ever drone attack on the country. So it's clearly that was just for effect. To try and show that Ukraine's still there, the war's still there. He's very worried that the war has kind of slipped out of popular consciousness with the war in the Middle East. And this is also completely outraged the sort of European politicians, and I include Starmer in with that, for whom the war in Ukraine is, for them, a politically existential matter, because if the war bogs down completely, if Russia wins, or at least if Ukraine can't actually defeat Russia, and there's some sort of messy ceasefire, frozen conflict, the amount of political capital that European liberalism has put into this war, there would be a major crisis, especially with the rise of the populist right, who I'm sure would take the Orban line, a sort of pro-Russian line, of something that the war must be concluded, even if on more Russian terms than anyone else's. Now, one thing that's come on from what Alex said was the American line on the war in Ukraine seems to be all over the place. On the one hand, you've still got major amounts of American involvement with targeting, with intelligence, provision of weapons. Okay, Europe has to pay for them, but nonetheless, they're still providing them. And with Trump, he's all over the place. He has summits with Putin in Alaska. Next week, he's saying, "Oh, Ukraine can win." There doesn't seem to be any coherence here. So, on the one hand, beneath this incoherence, you've still got the neocon line of using Ukraine to wear down Russia militarily and hopefully provoke a major crisis in Ukraine. That's still in existence. I don't know how this is going to pan out with the bogging down of the war. It seemed to be moving towards a sort of a frozen conflict. But the Europeans, on the other hand, seem to be ratcheting up the war. The recent drone attacks on a Russian refinery near Leningrad, or St. Petersburg as it's now called, seems to have come from, or at least gone across, the territory of NATO countries, especially Estonia. And this, to me, marks a significant ratcheting up of international tensions. It's almost like inviting Russia to respond more against NATO countries in the hope of getting an Article 5 response, etc., bringing America back full scale. You know, the neocon line, not just in practice, but in words, forcing Trump to act that way. That's what I think here. This is, I think, in response to the downgrading of Ukraine's war in the sort of general consciousness of the world because of the much more dangerous and much more important war in the Gulf. Now, there was something else. There's also the question of where do the European powers stand with this war in the Gulf? Again, there's incoherence. And I can't work out quite where they're heading on this thing. You had Merz, for instance, and the head of NATO, Rutte, congratulating Trump on attacking Iran. You had the Spanish premier almost alone condemning it. In between, you had this kind of shilly-shallying of not condemning what America's done, but condemning the Iranian defensive response to it. And then they're saying, well, we don't really want to get involved in the Gulf of Hormuz and so forth. So I think we're seeing really quite a lot of incoherence here. And I think how much of this is merely trying to reacting to events on the ground. And they weren't actually come out with any strong position on this war until they see which way it's actually going. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Mike's trying to answer. Yasmin, you want to come in?
You let Yasmin and Jack in next if Jack wants to come back in.
Okay, Yasmin's putting her hand up. Yeah, go ahead, Yasmin.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, okay now.
Anyway, I need to leave, so if possible, I wanted to go now and then leave. A couple of points. First, on what Alex Green was saying. The problem is that I follow actually not only the differences expressed in the various TV channels, but also social media of various Democrats, people in the Republican Party who now become unhappy about this war, the MAGA side that is now against this war. None of this, as far as I can see, are what you would call divisions of significance. They don't seem to make any difference. This is partly because someone was yesterday asking me why can't they find someone to impeach him? They're not in a position to do so. The Senate, the Congress will not vote that. I don't know if people are hoping after November there will be a change in the balance of forces. I can't see it. In terms of the Democrats, you have to remember that they are as much in favor of defeating Iran and supporting Israel as Trump is. The question is they don't like the way he's doing this. The Democrats have constantly had as many IPAC supporters as the Republicans, some of them far more aggressive in terms of defending Israel than the Republicans. None of this matters unless there can be a change in power in the United States. And at the moment, we are not seeing contradictions that are strong enough to reduce the strength of the current president. People laugh at him, but at the end of the day, he seems to be able to do what he wants. Otherwise, how can you have a war of 30 days with such devastating effect, not just on Iran, not just in the Middle East, but to the world economy, and tolerate a man like him? There's no challenge to that in the US. In the Europeans, I agree with what Paul was saying. We are seeing very limited utterings of, he doesn't know what he's done. Netanyahu has given him false information, all that. But are any of them opposing this war? When there was a vote on the first couple of days after the war started, where a leader of another country, another religion, was assassinated. I was one of the worst enemies of Ayatollah Khamenei, but the fact that you assassinate someone because Israel tells you this will lead to regime collapse is ridiculous. But where were France, Britain, Germany? They voted with the United States. They supported the US position. Where is Macron's position on this war? Yes, there are utterances that this was irrational and so on. But in the long term, these people have not come against the hegemon power, and that is unlikely to change. Starmer is giving military support now. Okay, it's defensive military support. You call it what you want, but it's not real. In terms of the BBC, I think one of the main problems is what Owen Jones tried to expose and went to court with it. Luckily, he won. But the Middle East editor of the BBC is a member of proudly says that he was a member of IDF, yeah, in his youth. He's pro-Zionist, he's pro-Israeli. And in fact, the BBC is being taken to court by 6 members of the Arabic service who say their reports about Gaza were censored, were stopped, and so on. As an institution, I think it has become conservative, small c, partly because mainly probably because of the after effects of the Iraq War, the Hutton inquiries that some of us might have forgotten, but I always remember everyone was at fault except Bush and Blair and Alistair Campbell. So we are in a situation where, yes, the BBC, a state organization's broadcasting authority follows the state, but this wasn't always as black and white as it is today. Immediately before the Iraq War, we did see journalists questioning the logic of that war. I think occasionally we do see reports by Jeremy Bowen that is readable. You might disagree with his analysis, but at least he's not gung-ho for American presidency. But I think the editors of news programs and debating programs are all very much influenced by a political line, which is both conservative small c and obedient to the ruling state. I will finish here. Thanks.
Thanks, Yasmin. See you later. Jack. Jack.
Okay, I was going to expect Mike in. Okay, I'll just give my own take on it. Well, over the recent period, I don't know, what was it? John Ryan, you asked me what's my attitude to the BBC. Well, I don't watch TV, and increasingly with the radio, I'm going, for God fucking sake, or excuse my Anglo-Saxon, and going, I just can't listen to it. Now, I can read lots of things, but when things become too stupid, I should listen to. I should have the patience because it's the other side. But I suppose my how should I put it? My depths of patience does reach its limits, and I just go, oh, listen to something sensible like Beethoven or something like that. So yeah, I find it infuriating, and as I say, stupid. If it was intelligent commentary that you disagree with, that's one thing. But anyway, so that's just my take on that. Alex, you asked some interesting questions. Of course, there are tensions in the US establishment. Of course, in terms of the imperialist powers, depending on how you define Russia and China. But if we're talking about the Western, of course, there are tensions. There's jockeying. They're not all just how should I put it? Like troops to be ordered about and dragooned as a single entity. Nonetheless, my own take on tensions in the United States is more along the lines that we're dealing with nuance as opposed to a strategic difference. I mean, remember Trump sort of marketed himself. I mean, you believe it, I didn't believe it, but he marketed himself, remember, as the man who would finish all these endless wars. And okay, we don't know how long Iran will go on for. I mean, who the hell does know? But it was the Democrats that were seen as much more the war party in terms of marketing. And it was Trump who was, in inverted terms, the peace party. So, of course, there are tensions between the US Democrats and Republicans, and there are midterms coming, and obviously the Democrats will hope to do well by voicing their criticisms of the Iran operation if it goes wrong. So I think that's true. As to the US losing power, it really depends on where you want to put the marker. If you put it at 1945, of course, it's inevitable that the US would lose power. But I mean, I look around the world and given the collapse of the Soviet Union, I would say that the United States increased its power. Okay, you've got the rise of China, but I just, I try to illustrate at least how I see things with the sort of the terrible situation in Cuba. There they are, blockaded, running out of oil. What does China do? What does Russia do? I know it will protest, but it's not doing what Khrushchev did. When the United States kidnaps a friendly president, what did China do? Basically nothing. So, yeah, of course, there's jockeying. Of course, the United States has a rival. I'd say it only has one serious rival. I mean, of course, if you think that I think that reform has just come in with Trump, well, we go back, don't we, to what the hell was his previous outfit? UKIP and all the rest of it. No, of course, the right has long antecedents. That's certainly true. What I was trying to bring out really is the idea that if you have one big demonstration or this cross-class movement called the Together Alliance, that will stop the rise of the right. It's obviously the case that the right can be thrown back here or thrown back there. But my argument is really that the global hegemon is now, excuse me, is now actively sponsoring the far right. And the example I drew on is from my youth with right-wing social democracy that was promoted throughout Western Europe, and then neoliberalism. And so I am trying to make the argument that the idea that you can view reform and the far right in simply national terms is mistaken. And I would argue further that while you can speculate, about Trump, giving Germany the go-ahead, I would just ask the question of why Trump or why the United States would do that. I mean, as far as I see it, it's done everything to precisely stop such a development. That seems to have been US policy in terms of both Republicans and Democrats. So yes, there is the question of trying to cleave Russia away from China. But for what it's worth, that's the only way I can sort of make sense of Trump's rhetoric. But on the other hand, if you look at what Trump is offering Russia, is it enough to cleave them away from China? You can talk about the beginnings of processes and all the rest of it, but my answer is no. It does strike me actually what's going on at the moment between the United States and Europe is far from the United States sort of washing its hands. What we've got is a sort of prediction that Trotsky made after World War I, and that is a further radical subordination of Europe, as opposed to, Europe, go ahead and unite Europe under Germany or something like that. I just don't see it. What you raise is important to discuss, and that's certainly the case. Divisions amongst the Republicans. Well, again, of course there are divisions. So there are going to be divisions in the Democrats. There are divisions. It's the nature of politics. But I don't see a serious challenge at the present time, before November at least, to Trump. Yes, you've got Tucker Carlson and you've got, various outliers, but I don't think that's anything of any great significance at the present time. I don't really know. Well, I sort of worked out. It took me a couple of seconds, Alex. Sorry for not being in quite that thought world. Who the neo-Spartacists were? The neo-Spartacists, I think, as what I would call the Spartacists, and you call them neo because you're an ex-Spartacist. I think that's right. They certainly think of themselves as Spartacists. They call themselves Spartacus. They still speak with an American accent. They still come out with broadly similar politics. I wasn't aware that they had a position of no inter-imperialist rivalries. I hadn't really come across that one. What I would argue, yes, there is if that is their position, I don't want to put words in their mouth. I would argue at the present time, if you put China aside and we say that's something else, just for the sake of the argument, I would say that there are no serious inter-imperialist rivalries in what we can call the West at the present time. This isn't, pre-World War I. This isn't pre-World War II. If you introduce China into it, then we have a different discussion. But I don't see France, Germany, Britain posing as a serious rival to the United States at all. So yeah, as Yasmin says, okay, they can voice their criticisms of the Iran war to the extent that they count militarily is very little, and their opposition is purely, well, it's not even verbal because it's not consistent. It's we support the defense of America, so in the middle of a war, the other side will attack, and so it's clear what side they're on. They're on the side of the Americans. So yeah, they're certainly not. There's no serious attempt at rivalry there because they're not capable of it. And as I said, my argument would be that America is attempting to further subordinate them. In terms of the demonstration yesterday, apologies for not mentioning your party. I presume you were on that contingent. I did take some pickies of it. I did talk to comrades on that contingent. It didn't look as big as that, but again, I wasn't able to judge. But your assessment, I think, is broadly correct, that what we're dealing with now with your party was a stillbirth, that in terms of our ability to argue and hope to affect and move things has been clamped down upon. Maybe it was an illusion that we thought we could do that, but it was right to do what we did. In terms of Mike and me, I don't know, Mike, you'll have to speak for yourself. I don't think that a Labour Party Mark II is not viable. That's my argument, because there's a Labour Party Mark I. You can have a Labour Party Mark II project, but it isn't going to be a Labour Party Mark II. That's just nonsense in my view. So Tusk is a nonsense. All these things in terms of their Labourism is nonsense, even if it's about the spirit of 45, with left unity and all the rest of it. The reason I quote Podemos is more the question of the referendum. We're the most democratic party, except we're not. I mean, we've just had Carla Roberts give us a description of the regime that your party is imposed on its own leadership. You cannot if you're a member of the leadership, you cannot criticize the full-time officers. You're gagged in a more effective way than if you're a rank and file member. What sort of party is that? And just lastly, what I would say, Toby, in terms of my own take on the International Holocaust Remembrance Association so-called definition, along with all of its examples, is this is a sort of test that if you want to be trusted in government by the Americans, you've got to pass that test. And that's how I interpreted, however modest the parliamentary presence of Caroline Lucas was, i.e. it was Caroline Lucas, I interpreted it at the time as being, we're safe to join a coalition government. That's how I took it. And Polanski's, how should you put it, ambiguity has to be resolved one way or another. If you want to be taken as a trustworthy candidate for joining a coalition government, this is a test you have to pass. If you don't pass it, then you're not trustworthy. And we will, what was Mike Pompeo's phrase? We will use pushback on you. So, again, I don't think you can avoid saying yes or no. The fact that this Liberal PD leader hasn't said yes, I think is of some significance, but it's not. It doesn't mean that spring has arrived. I think that will. I think that will do me.
Yeah, there's always next time. Mike, please.
For what it's worth, I think I do agree with Alex that it's a worthwhile discussion, that there's a worthwhile discussion about what is the extent of intercapitalist contradictions, interior contradictions, bureaucratic contradictions within the United States. Two, what is the extent of inter-imperialist contradictions at the present time. Three, how far are we actually within the framework of the continuity of, in essence, Stalinism, and how far are we within the framework of something new that left populism amounts to the destruction of the inherited structures of the labour movement. For what it's worth, I think this is a discussion which we're going to have to continue, and it would be useful for you to contribute in a literary way to the paper, and for us to have a literary discussion in the paper as well as this sort of discussion. But for what it's worth, my judgment hasn't changed actually. Wadee Halaby persuaded me of this in the 1980s, that the United States took centralized power over the capitalist class, that world capital is centralized through Wall Street. to a radically greater extent than world capital was centralized through London in 1815 to 1914. And that it's extraordinarily difficult for the other capitalist powers to break free of the United States. That the United States has more higher degree of direct, practical political control of the political life of the European powers. And just FX, 1968. In May 1968, the NATO High Command refused to allow Charles de Gaulle to move French troops out of Germany to squash the mass strike movement in France. And as a result of that, de Gaulle was forced to make major concessions to the CGT, and those major concessions to the CGT resulted in the replacement of de Gaulle by Pompidou, who was much more strongly Atlanticist. And the United States got back France into a more Atlanticist alignment. The Greens, the German Greens, turn into the most Atlanticist party. The institutional forms of corruption in the major capitalist powers have the natural result of the dictatorship of the of money capital. But then the natural result of the dictatorship of money capital is the dictatorship of the predominant money capital, which in before 1914 represented the UK, before in the current period it represents the US. So that I think that in order for Europe, France or Germany to appear as a rival to the United States, it would be necessary to have a radical radical European Bonapartist project, which is not the AfD, is not the Rassemblement National, is not, because it would have to be an anti-American project. And Meloni is not an anti-American. Vox is not anti-American. The RN is not anti-American. The AfD is not anti-American. None of these are anti-American projects. They need to be an anti-American project to unify Europe by blood and iron along the lines of Bismarck or Lincoln. In order to create a Europe which was capable of being a rival of the United States. So as far as that's concerned, as far as internal contradictions in US state, well, I would be much more willing to believe in serious internal contradictions in the US state if the United States state had not pursued a consistent policy towards Iran. Moshe last week drew our attention to the fact that the Brookings Institute laid out in I think it was in the early 2000s, middle 2000s, the line of approach of on-off sanctions, on-off threats, Israel as the spearhead and so on and so forth, that this was the line for US policy, a proposal for US policy towards Iran, and that there isn't an autonomy of Netanyahu, because Netanyahu is following a policy pursued by the United States. Equally, Trump supplied the anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons which allowed the Ukrainians to defeat the Russian tank incursion in 2022. It was Trump who supplied those in his first term. The foreign policy and war policy of the United States is continuous across Republican and Democratic administrations, and the guys who are anti-war on quote isolationist grounds remain outliers. I'm spending too much time, so I'm not going to talk about the continuity of Stalinism, but I do think Podemos et al. These guys come from Eurocommunism. It's not, similarly, Jeremy Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn is the guy on the Labour left who's most consistently friendly with the Morning Star. This is these guys. Okay, they're not actually running the Morning Star, but they come from the appropriation of the bureaucratic conceptions out of the official communist parties, and in particular, the left populism is Eurocommunism carried to the nth degree. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Okay, we've got one hand up. Alex, over to you.
Well, just very quickly, because it certainly is a, you know, there are a lot of things being discussed here. But let me try and sort of take a couple of highlights. First of all, when J.D. Vance made a speech to the AfD Congress, that was not the voice of the United States. It was a bid to a different wing inside the European bourgeoisies for a different policy going in a different direction than Biden. And you can go outwards from that example in all kinds of different ways. There are many, many examples, and Paul talks about the, you know, the shift at minimum in terms of the actual level of United States support for Zelensky. I mean, let's take one other example. Nobody's ever going to forget the humiliation of Zelensky in the White House. That was not the same policy as Biden. Now, on the subjects of left populism, I completely agree with you, Mike, about left populism being it's like congealed Eurocommunism. It's the end product of Eurocommunism. And in the two sort of speed history sessions that I think you're speaking at the one tomorrow, and I'm going to be speaking at the one in 2 weeks' time, coming out of the discussion on the relationship of your party to the Greens and cross-class coalitions. The exact title that I put for my talk on left populism was that it's Eurocommunism, left populism. I think left populism is the permanent popular front. It's the end point of the arc of Stalinism. It's taking 1935 or 1936 and saying that's it, that's all there is. Unlike Torres, we're not talking about a tactic. We're talking about the strategy, and that strategy is explicitly and has been carried forth in various ways and by various politicians the destruction of the historic labor movement. It is the rolling back of the Second International and the Third and the Fourth, because they're, you know, Russian dolls inside the Second International. And that's really fundamental, because when you stop talking about a workers' socialist party and you start talking about radical democracy, you are going back to the arguments that took place in the formation of the Second International. That's concrete content to the notion of retrogression of class consciousness, because it actually involves the abolition of the notion of the centrality of the working class, and then we're away, because we're no longer fighting for a workers' government. We're not fighting for workers' rule. We're not saying that there's any instrument that can ever fundamentally change capitalism. And my point is, we a long time ago, let's just say it before the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a fight between, let's call it the Fourth International, Third International, Second International, over what do we mean by labor or the workers to power on a socialist program. That is not the world we live in at all. And we've got to a point where this Labour Party 1.0 is a bit like the Socialist Party in France, or the Danish Social Democrats, who just got a vote that's you know, the lowest vote they've had since 1903, or the German Social Democrats in Saxony, who had votes of the lowest votes they've had since 1913. This is Blair set out to destroy the Labour Party. Corbyn, when he was the leader of the Labour Party, had 2 points of support. He had the old left Social Democrats, and he had Momentum, who were populists. As he left the Labour Party, he went over to the view of populism. They fight it out. They resist any mention of socialism. They don't want to talk about the working class. They don't want to talk about capitalism. My point about this is not just it's an analytically interesting point. The point is, it means that our tasks are very, very different from fighting it out inside that old Second International framework, where it was, what do we mean by Labour to power on a socialist program? Or what do we mean by a workers' government and expropriation of the bourgeoisie? That's not what's going on. We have, and in that respect, I think one of the reasons I find your paper and your discussions interesting, because I think you actually do think about these things, but I think you're too static in the way in which you analyze what's going on in the world. You're not seeing far enough around the corner, because things are happening and unloosening and changing that are not yet complete. And so that's why I think it's so important that we do talk about both of these subjects. And yes, I'd be happy to try and contribute on a literary basis. And I would come, my final point is I would come back to this. The Russians actually have sent an oil tanker to Cuba, which I believe if it gets there is actually unloaded is enough for several weeks. But the Chinese did not intervene over Venezuela, and the Chinese are being very cautious about Iran. But on both of those points, I think the United States was aiming at China. And that is a long distance, long-term competition. Totally agree that there's nothing given about, you know, the Taiwan Straits and so forth. But what we have here is this problem of China, as I pointed out in the article I did write for Weekly Worker, won't go away. In 2025, at your conference or AGM or whatever you call it, you said, we've got to sort out the problem of China. We've got to discuss it. We've got to work it out, and so on and so forth. It is the key question. Jack, you said, let's put that aside. Like we're doing maths, right? We're going to, for the sake of argument, we're going to suspend disbelief about China or belief about China, whatever it is. It's a legitimate thing to do. I understand why you were doing that and what you said, but we can't keep putting China off. It is the question of the epoch. Is what is the nature of that competition between China and the United States? And Europe is a footnote by comparison, I agree. Sorry, thank you. I didn't mean to go on for so long, but
no, we're not in favour of short speeches, Alex. Much better to have long ones that go into the business. So there's no more hands. I think that might mean it's Jack. There you are. We're probably winding up then.
I'm definitely winding up.
Definitely.
Okay. I don't think there's any question that J.D. Vance's speech to the AFD is just business as normal. It clearly represents a change, and what I'm arguing certainly is precisely, therefore, that what you've got, not with JD, but with Rubio, is his State Department, what do they call it? Civilizational alignment. And therefore, that's why I was talking about this being equivalent, but clearly different to the United States carrying out an ideological struggle to achieve the hegemony of right-wing social democracy and following that neoliberalism. Something is changing. There's no question of that. The real question is that in terms of the United States, again, an if the United States has a situation where the Democrats win the midterms and the Democrats win the next presidency, depending on who the hell it is and all the rest of it, would we expect the United States to roll back to neoliberalism and the EU? And would it be, for example, what's the word, the Pompeo, would it be doing pushback on reform and Nigel Farage, right? That's the question I would ask. And the sort of answer, without knowing the answer, but my suspicion would be no. So of course there's change, and we need to take into account change. Anyway, so that's my argument on that one. I don't buy your, I mean, okay, you've been through a particular experience. I don't rate the Fourth International as an international. I think it's a marginal, a marginal group that might matter in terms of ideas, but not in terms of any serious material forces. But I take your point, and of course, we've been precisely arguing, about the working class suffering a strategic defeat. Clearly, that's the aim of the bourgeoisie. It's not a question of accommodating trade, taming the working class as a political force. It's about eliminating the working class as a political force. That's true. In terms of what you said about Venezuela and Cuba, exactly. And for that matter, Ukraine, we've made the point that you need to understand all three, all four actually. You need to understand Iran, you need to understand Venezuela, you need to understand Cuba, you need to understand Ukraine precisely in relationship to China. That if you don't understand this at the last analysis, this is about the United States versus China, you understand nothing. So what is the attempt to cleave Russia away from China by offering the Donbass? I mean, putting it crudely, obviously it's about China, but so is Venezuela, so is Iran, so is what's happening in Cuba. We agree. In terms of understanding China, I'm not volunteering myself, but it's clearly a task that Marxists, I've not read anything that I regard as serious on China, other than well-informed commentary, in other words, by people who speak Chinese, are familiar with Chinese politics. I've not read what I could describe as a Marxist analysis of China. All I can say in terms of my efforts, I don't think you can understand China without understanding the Soviet Union. So that's where I've put my efforts. I'm not saying that therefore allows you, that then opens up China. We now understand China. But I do think that your first step to understanding China is to understand China's origins in the Chinese Communist Party, its model, of Stalin's Soviet Union, and how and why the Soviet Union could happen in the world that we now have. But that's another discussion. But yeah, we ought to have these debates. We need these debates. Absolutely right.
Okay, that's it, comrades. I see Yasmin's back. That's good, but we're finished now. And I'll see you next week.
Just for Stan, we're not meeting now, are we, Yasmin? No, we're not. So we're not meeting each other after this meeting, Stan.
Okay.
So take care. See you. We might arrange a meeting tomorrow. That's the idea, but we'll talk.
Yep.
Anyway, thanks a lot, comrades. Have a good evening.
Yeah, see you all. Bye-bye.